Last year, the US Army signed an agreement with SpaceX that would allow the Army to experiment using Starlink broadband connections to move data across military networks. More recently, SpaceX asked permission to the FCC to carry out tests for the US Air Force to demonstrate the ability to transmit and receive information from points like stationary ground sites, airborne aircrafts and moving vehicles on the ground.
Also, in one of his tweets, Elon Musk has announced that Starlink will provide internet to aircrafts, ships, large trucks and RVs, but not to Tesla cars, as the antenna is too big.
These services, combined with what is offered by other satellites, though are useful for people on Earth, will also increase the dependency of terrestrial life to connections with technology in orbit, and this dependency is increasingly at risk.
At a recent event organized by the Air Force Association, Neil deGrasse Tyson talked to Chief of Space Operations General John W. Raymond, and they discussed the role of the US Space Force and the risks posed by Russia and by the new competitor in space, China. From the discussion, it emerges a scenario in which space is close to become the next battlefield.
Let me put a little sharper point on that. Today, so this isn't a future thing, this is today. There are robust sets of jammers that can jam both communication satellites and our GPS satellites, or navigation and timing satellites, if you will. Both China and Russia have directed energy weapons today. They have multiple systems that can think lasers that can blind or damage our satellite systems. Both China and Russia have missiles that they can launch from the ground and kinetically destroy a satellite in low Earth orbit in a matter of minutes. We saw that in 2007 very visibly when China shot down one of their own satellites.
General Raymond made the concern very public in an interview for Time magazine, where he talked about the launch of a Russian anti-satellite system positioned very close to an American satellite.
And the threat is not just coming from Russia. China too is showing some hostile behavior.
I talked very publicly this year for the first time about a Russian anti-satellite system. I referred to it as kind of like a nesting doll, where there's a doll inside of a doll inside of a doll. We've all seen those. Well, Russia launched a satellite right up next to one of our satellites, opened up, if you will, and released another satellite. We saw this behavior before a few years back, and that second satellite has the capability of releasing a projectile. And we know it is designed to kinetically destroy U.S. satellites in low Earth orbit. China today on orbit has a satellite that has a robotic arm. That robotic arm can be used in the future to grab a satellite, if you will. And then there's also cyber threats that we're concerned about. So that threat spectrum exists today. It is very broad. It is robust. That both China and Russia are continuing to develop those threats, and it's something that we have to protect against today. And that's why the establishment of the United States Space Force is so important.
These threats are two of the reasons that led to the establishment of the US Space Force. It was in December 2019 that the Space Force was established as a new independent military service, one of the 8 US uniformed services and the world's first, and currently only, independent space force in the world. The need for a dedicated space organisation within the US Armed Forces goes back to the beginning of the Cold War. Through the years, it went from being organised under several different Air Force major commands to unified, but still under the Air Force.
In a previous edition of the same event, Elon Musk was the guest on stage, and he confirmed the importance of maintaining a leadership position in space.
I have zero doubt that if the United States does not seek great innovations in space, it will be second in space. Okay. With as sure as nightfall is day. So it is a big deal. We got to make Starfleet happen. Like,
The United States have also expressed the concern during the United Nations Conference on Disarmament in 2018.
The United States has raised concerns over many years that the Russian Federation is actively pursuing the development and deployment of anti-satellite weapons. Since 2009, the Russian Ministry of Defense officials have repeatedly and publicly confirmed that anti-satellite weapons development is being conducted in Russia. During Mr. Putin's March 1st, 2018 State of the Nation speech, he unveiled no less than 6 new major offensive weapon systems. Mr. President, in October of last year, the Russian Ministry of Defense deployed a space object they claimed was a space apparatus inspector. But its behavior on orbit was inconsistent with anything seen before from on-orbit inspection or space situational awareness capabilities, including other Russian inspection satellite activities. We are concerned with what appears to be very abnormal behavior by a declared, quote, space apparatus inspector.
During the Arming Association event, DeGrasse pointed out that in early days of space, the Russians beat the United States in almost every matrix that mattered at the time.
But if you really unpack what unfolded over that time, the Russians, the Soviet Union, beat us at practically every metric that mattered at the time. You know, the first satellite, the first non-human animal, the first human, the first space station, the first person of color, Cuban person, of course, in the communist bloc. First docking. There were so many things that they beat us at, and my read of that era is, well, we were good at responding because we were coordinated. We were not so tribalized, for example, as we are today. We said, oh my gosh, this is important, let's do this. And then we responded to each one of those threats, ultimately leapfrogging where the Russians left off, and we landed on the moon. And then we said, okay, we win.
But how can we be assured that we are not playing catch-up again? This issue came up also in other sessions of the event. One of the key components to maintain leadership in space is the coordination between all the parties involved. A second key component, which was not existing in the early days of the space race, is the partnership with private operators.
Major General Deanna Bart makes a reference to this partnership in a different session of the event.
A lot of capability has gone to the commercial side. We've seen some of that explosion in the stand-up of Space Force due to folks like SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, others that are building space capability and launch capability, bringing down the price of launch. So those are all things we're taking advantage of as a new service as we move forward to lower costs and to continue to provide combat capability forward. So I think that's only going to continue, and I think in endgame it's going to mean General Geo gets better capabilities, more resilient capabilities that allow him to do machine-to-machine integration with his operations day in and day out.
This does not mean that the Space Force can rely completely on companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic. The situation is in fact different than it was in the past. During World War II, for example, the US needed a light four-wheel drive vehicle suitable for use on rough terrain, but instead of producing their own, they asked for proposals and finally asked Willys Overland and Ford to convert their assembly line to the production of a military vehicle. And so the Jeep was born. Today, the Space Force cannot rely solely on SpaceX or other commercial operators. First, because these private operators have international interests. Secondly, because rather than having a dedicated production or service as a resource, it is more convenient to have multiple partners in different domains to share a mission. The current focus of the Space Force is to develop these partnerships.
In this first year of standing up an independent Space Force, we've also stood up some partnership offices, and we have inked an MOU, for example, with Japan to put a hosted payload on Japanese satellites to provide capability at a reduced cost and increase the speed of when we can launch it. We did the same thing with Norway. We're going to put 2 communication payloads on 2 Norwegian satellites. Saved us over $900 million, just shy of $1 billion, and will get us onto orbit sooner. As we design that force, we want to design it in a way that capitalizes on this new business model that has emerged, that produces satellites off of a production line rather than the one-off handmade wooden shoe that takes years and years and years to build. And we want to build this coalition friendly from the beginning to allow our international partners to invest. And we think that partnership is key to deterrence and key to our strength.
And having allies is important as there is greater competition to control space.
And I would say with China, I mean, we look at the Silk and Belt and Road. China is looking to build capabilities around the globe that allow it to downlink and operate its satellites and communicate. And so as they build that capability, they now get into a global nature of being able to command and control their capabilities. So while it may seem like in CENTCOM or even AFRICOM and some of the AORs that are more counterterrorism focused, there is absolutely great power competition going on for influence and the ability to have access for capabilities and infrastructure.
The message that comes from this session is something we heard before. The United States cannot be a passive player. The key solution is to show strength and intent, but also to act the diplomatic way, and with more modern treaties that replace the old ones.